Okay, in this video, I'm going to be talking about a useful tool for working with textures and materials within RenderMan and Maya, and that is the Hypershade editor. So this is the Hypershade editor, and what it is a node-based system for working with textures and materials and all the nodes that can be used to modify textures and materials. So in this case, on the right-hand side, I have my material represented here as a node, and its attributes have images plugged into them. So my diffuse color, you can see my color has an input coming in. And so you can see here my diffuse color map has a Pixar texture node plugged into it. Okay, so it's a visual tool for building this relationship between different assets in your scene. When those assets are brought into a node editor, like the Hypershade editor, or within the actual node editor in Maya, there's another menu or editor called the node editor. If you come to Windows, node editor, right? Um, when those assets in your scene are brought into either of these node editors, they are represented as nodes. And so a node is essentially a way that you can view the different attributes or properties of your whatever object or asset you have created in your scene and view those attributes as inputs and outputs to connect to other objects to build a relationship. So in this case, we have the color information from our texture node plugged into the color channel or color attribute of my material node. Okay? So whatever I have in my scene can be represented thus as a node. So the Hypershade editor is a type of node editor, as I mentioned earlier, that works primarily with materials and textures and lights and other rendering nodes. Anything related to shading, lighting, and rendering. If I went over to the Windows node editor and opened up the node editor, the node editor will work with any type of node in Maya, or just about any type of node. So if I created a new polygon object, I'm going to kind of poly modeling, click on sphere, you'll see that sphere and its shape is actually represented here as nodes. So I just wanted to make that distinction that almost anything in Maya can be represented as a node, and you can build and edit the relationships between those objects. So in order to access the Hypershade editor, what I'm going to do is I'm going to close that and I'm going to go to Maya. There's two different ways. We can click on this little sphere icon right here for the Hypershade window, or I can come over to Windows, Rendering Editors, Hypershade. Okay, your Hypershade window will look something like this. So in the middle, we have our workspace, or our graph editor sometimes is what you might call it. And so the workspace is where we're going to be actually building those relationships between nodes and making our connections. Up at the top, we have a browser, and the browser is just going to list all of the assets in my scene that can be used in the Hypershade editor. So my materials, and you'll see they have their little tabs, materials, textures, utilities, and all my other different types of tabs that you're probably not going to really be using anytime soon, except for the materials and textures and utilities. On the left-hand side, we have our create menu. And so this is going to create new nodes, whether you want to add a new material, like if I wanted to add a new Pixar surface, or I want to add a file node. So under 2D textures, I can add a new file node to load in a new texture image. So anytime you need to create a new node, you can find them over in the Create tab. On the right-hand side, we're going to have essentially the same thing as what you would see in the attribute editor if you're selecting a texture or a material, right? So I click on material, you can see I have all of my material attributes over on the right-hand side. And if I make that smaller, you can see it's the exact same thing as you would see in the attribute editor. Gain, gain, color, color, roughness, roughness. So when I'm working within RenderMan or within the Hypershade menu, I like to kind of clean this up a little bit because you can see this workspace where I'm going to be doing all of my work is actually a little too small. So the first thing I do is I get rid of this little material viewer. I didn't mention what that was before, but essentially it just does a little preview of your material. I just had it set to hardware. I can set it to RenderMan. It takes a little setup and it can be kind of glitchy. So I usually don't even use it. So I'm just going to close it. Because I personally like to just have the attribute editor showing while I'm working, I usually just close this little property editor inside the actual Hypershade menu. The browser, you use it, but you don't use it all the time, right? It's not frequent. So I don't like this taking up so much space. So what I do is I like to pop it off, and I can pop it off by clicking this little pop-up window right here. And I'm going to click and drag this, and I'm going to drag this right on top of the create menu. What that's going to do is going to make it so the browser and the create menu are little tabs down here. And I can make this a lot smaller now. Or I guess this is as small as I'm going to be able to make it. But you can see I freed up myself a lot of visual real estate here. So let's talk about how to start adding nodes into this space. So by default, you're going to see something like this, right? And so it's going to say press tab to create a new node. So first thing I'm going to do is I want to work with an existing material I already have. And so I'm going to select the material in the browser. So I'm going to grab this wood material that you see here. And I have these buttons right here that are going to let me add them to my workspace. So I'm going to talk about these ones first. This one with the little plus icon is add. So what it does is it just adds it into my workspace. I can click the minus button to subtract them. So it's going to remove it from my workspace. If I have a complex setup and a bunch of nodes, but I want to clear them out or I want to clear out certain ones, what I can do is I can click on this clear graph button, and it's just going to give me a clean graph. I don't really want to do that, so I'm going to bring those back in a second. And you can see that I got it all messy. Let's come back over here. So let's go ahead and add that wood back in. Okay. There's these buttons over here. So this one right here is going to show me all of my inputs. So all the things that are coming in and connecting to whatever node I have selected. Okay. All right, so I'm going to clear those out and just re-add that wood back in. I can press the one on the other side. That's going to be outputs. So it's going to show all the things that my wood material is feeding into. So I'm going to subtract that out. Or I can press this button right here, inputs and outputs, and it's going to show me everything. Everything that's connected to the node I have selected and everything that my node is pushing into or feeding into. I usually just do that. I can also just select the material and just click the input output button. It'll automatically add it and show all the inputs and outputs. So a lot faster. So in order to navigate the Hypershade editor, it's pretty straightforward. Middle mouse click and drag is going to pan around and move you around the workspace. Left click and drag left clicking on your object is going to select it, and then left clicking and dragging is going to let you move it around. The zoom wheel is going to let you zoom in and out. And then F is going to use, just like in the 3D view, it's going to be framing. So if you select something, it's going to zoom in on it. So if I zoom out, click on Pixar Texture, press F, it's going to frame it for me. Press A, if you really want to show everything. So you've probably noticed by now that these nodes have a lot of different circles on the left-hand and right-hand side of them. The left-hand circles represent areas of input. So these are the inputs where you can plug in something else to drive an attribute in your node. The right-hand circles represent outputs where you can take data from this node to drive another node, right? To drive an attribute in something else. Okay. So in this instance, there's a lot of different things going on, but for instance, I have here something that you guys will most commonly run into is I have a texture map node, right? So this node right here is a Pixar texture. You can see right here, Pixar texture, even though I named it something differently. And it is taking a texture image that I've found somewhere else, and I am plugging that output. So I'm clicking the hamburger menu to see the more of my nodes inputs and outputs, and the output, the color output, is going into the color input of my material, and that's how I'm seeing it on the actual object that has the material applied to it. So those are on the left-hand side the inputs, and on the right-hand side the outputs. The colors of the inputs and outputs are important. So these represent different types of data. Green is the basic one that we're going to see the most. green represents a single number value. Red, which is probably the second most common one that you're going to mess around with, represents color, right? And so a color is a little bit more advanced than you need to know at this current moment, but a color is actually made up of three single color or single data values, right? So a color is usually represented by red, green, and blue, so three different values. And so there's a red channel, green channel, and blue channel packed into a red output or color output. So we can see here, if I look at my material and look at its attributes inside the attribute editor, we can kind of see that correlation between what is color and what is a single number value. So if I look at my color attribute for my diffuse color, you can see plugged into my diffuse color input is a red attribute or a color attribute. A slider or a number, right, is going to be represented by a single value data type. So you can see here my specular roughness, which is normally a slider and a number, right? I'm just going to, I can break that later, is taking in a green data type or a single number data type. So this is really important. Maya does a great job of preventing you from making connections you can't, right? So when I try to connect something like a red data to a green attribute, some of them are open, but that's for different reasons. You'll see most of those green attributes, single data attributes, can't have a color plugged into them, right? Just because the data doesn't match each other. So Maya's pretty good at stopping you from doing that.